The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So when we were on vacation, former First Lady Barbara Bush passed away, and we have now learned that former President George H.W. Bush is in a Houston hospital because of an infection that has spread to his blood. And there's sort of a couple different things going on here. He went to the hospital almost directly after Barbara Bush's funeral. He is said to be recovering. He is said to be responding to treatment to this infection that has spread to his blood. At the same time, we, of course, wish him the best. It is not uncommon that sometimes elderly couples who have been together a very, very long time do tend to experience end of life at similar times. It is this thing that does happen with some frequency.
You'll hear like a story of someone suiting up for the funeral of the other.
Yes.
And they show up to get them, and they've also passed away. That happens a lot.
You do hear about that. And of course, George H.W. Bush, 93 years old. Even George W. Bush at this point is like 70, isn't he?
I don't think quite 70, but I know George H.W. Bush is now the longest living president ever.
Is that right?
He surpassed Gerald Ford last year, yeah.
Didn't Reagan live to 93, though?
91,
or was that 80?
too. Like, yeah, Reagan was, I think, third oldest.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
interesting.
George H.W. Bush, the longest living president ever.
Every time there's like, I mean, I don't know if you had something specific you wanted to talk about, but the thing that I sort of find interesting, and there was actually quite a bit of a discussion of this in relation to George W. Bush at the conference I was at in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, is once you get some distance from a president, you see their record more objectively, hopefully, but at the same time, personally, everybody just kind of remembers the presidents much more positively in a sense. There's this sort of rose-colored glasses thing, and we've kind of seen it happen with George W. Bush, who now particularly, I think he's benefiting from Donald Trump being so unhinged as president. That's making George W. Bush seem much more reasonable in retrospect. But the policy of George W. Bush was still absolutely and totally despicable, and it's important to remember that. Like when we see him on the Ellen Show, talking about how great it is that Ellen is friends with one of George W. Bush's daughters and and his paintings and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
His policy was hugely destructive and horrible, and it's important to sort of separate the individual from the policy and not just remember some of these people as having done great things when they didn't.
I think it's because George W. Bush seems to be a little bit like personally likable. Like you can laugh at his jokes, and he comes across as like a circus clown a little bit.
And he's
certainly
sort of
not the most intelligent guy.
He
but
self-deprecates
hokey.
the stuff about weird words that he used during his presidency and how, strategery and all this different stuff. So yeah, it does come off as more likable, but I think it is important. And I'm not even necessarily making a specific point about George H.W. Bush, although I didn't agree with the guy's politics, but certainly he was a much less extreme Republican than many modern Republicans. We can like him as a guy, and he seems like a very likable guy, and he's done really good charity work with Bill Clinton over the last 10 years or 10, 15 years. But let's not forget about the policy just because we sort of sympathize with the personality once they're no longer in office, right?
Yeah, and I think it also depends on like how things turn out. So like the two big takeaways from the George W. Bush presidency, one was the war in Iraq, and the other one was the crashing of the economy.
Yes.
We've recovered from the Great Recession, and the economy's doing pretty well right now.
Sure.
And also we're now out of Iraq, even though, of course, the Middle East is very unstable right now. I think because we're a little bit beyond that point, we're not in the heat of the moment anymore, we can kind of like forgive him, and we just kind of forget what happened 10 years ago.
I think what I would say, I would agree with you more if George W. Bush got us out of those messes after getting us into them, but he didn't. Like he just got us into them, and then it was up to other people to get us out of them. So although I understand what you're saying, like there was resolution in a way, but all the people that lost their jobs and went bankrupt because of the crashed economy, all the people that died because of Bush's decision to go to Iraq, we got out of it, but at a very big cost. And I think it's what you're saying ultimately is right, which is let's not forget about that stuff.
Yeah, people have very short attention spans too, and Bush is more favorable than not. That's something you wouldn't expect after he left office. I think he had like a 28% approval rating at the time.
Right.
But things have recovered pretty well, and now in comparison to Trump, I think we are looking at the past through rose-colored glasses. That's for sure.
And ultimately, what it is like when I look at George W. Bush now, I'm not forgetting. And I know we started talking about H.W., but now we're talking about W. But that's fine. I'm not forgetting about the record, but I see him as a normal human that I disagree with on policy, Whereas I see Donald Trump as almost another species altogether. And I think that that's where the normalization of Bush retrospectively can tend to happen. And it's important not to normalize the horrible, horrible governance of George W. Bush. There's a new study which shows that the effects of staying up late, of being a, quote, night owl, is not very good. The journal called Chronobiology International tracked 500,000 adults in the UK for about 6.5 years. And they found that evening types, known in the United States sometimes as night owls, had a 10% increased risk of all-cause mortality compared with morning types. So the idea here is, once you adjust for economic differences, pre-existing conditions, underlying disease, that being someone who stays up late versus someone who doesn't increases the chance that you will die from all causes put together during the study period. This is not that surprising, because there have been a lot of studies that show that there are conditions that afflict third shift workers, people that work when it's dark out and then sleep when it's light out. Not only conditions like depression and anxiety, but also sort of more physical conditions, although of course depression and anxiety have significant physical manifestations. It doesn't appear to be good. It seems that there is a benefit to sort of following the natural, I don't know if we would call them day-night cycles or
sleep cycles,
body rhythms, circadian rhythms, some people like to call them, of being asleep when it's dark and being awake when it's light. It does seem to be bad for human health. And I don't know, there's going to be night shift workers probably forever.
Yeah, and they'll get paid more too.
What is in some jobs, yeah. What's the solution? Is it a rotating schedule where if you work where there is not like a set third shift staff, where they sort of rotate on who does third shift? I don't know what the answer is.
And that's not great too, to get readjusted.
It's also terrible for shifting around your schedule from day to day throughout the week. I don't know what the answer is, but it seems pretty clear at this point that it's really not good to be up all night and sleeping during the day.
Could be like a correlation versus causation issue too, because I think, stereotypically we think of sometimes night owls as being maybe lazy, maybe like a little bit depressed, or having like some sort of social anxiety where they want to just like sleep through the day and do their stuff at night. Do you get that
No,
sense
I mean,
too?
that's one caricature of the night owl. I think for most people, it's actually job related.
Yeah, but we also, would you agree with this, though? We think of, like, the early birds as the go-getters. They want to be up at the crack of dawn. Okay, so I think
there is
if you agree with that, the reverse could be true, too.
There is that stereotype.
Yes,
but
stereotype.
I don't know, exactly how true it is. I do think that, let's explore causation versus correlation. What third factors might account for why the people who are up all night and sleeping during the day are less healthy than those who have a more normal schedule? Well, number one would be, if you're up very late because you're out drinking at bars, drinking a lot of alcohol is not good for health reasons.
Yeah.
If, as a result of being up late, you are going to 24-hour fast food restaurants because nothing else is open, that could explain why this is a correlation but not actually a causal relationship, and maybe it's the bad diet. But the all-cause mortality studies at least make an attempt to normalize for all other factors, which I think would include stuff like diet. But I don't know. How do you really do that? It's very hard to do.
And I think that's why we only see like a 10% difference, whereas if you included those other causal factors, it could be a lot higher than that. So maybe it does have to do with like our natural sleep cycles. We are, after all, hunter-gatherers. You got to be up with the other animals if you're going to be able to kill and eat stuff. And then, we became largely an agrarian society. You got to be up at the crack of dawn to tend to the fields, right? So
I know what you're saying. I've read some, and I tend to agree with what you're saying. That's my instinct. I did recently read some studies which say that the likening of, let me, how do I want to say this? That comparing the current state of life for modern Western humans to that of when humans were hunter-gatherers, to make determinations about what is so-called like natural healthy behavior may not actually be that accurate. Okay. And there's a couple different reasons why, part of it being that there were also unhealthy elements of hunter-gatherer society, in addition to there having been healthy elements of it. So I don't know. I mean, that was always my instinct also, but a lot of this entire paleo diet
Right.
thing,
It does relate to diet, what you're getting to, I think.
it's based on the idea of going back to when we were hunter-gatherers, and there's really not very much evidence that that paleo diet is actually a uniquely healthy diet.
And they didn't live that long either.
Sure, but a lot
a lot of it has to do with like
infant
mortality
mortality,
rates.
yeah.
But still, I think all things considered, we're living longer now.
We certainly are once you get to 5 years old, that's for sure. But
I got there.
Life expectancy at 5 years old has not changed as much, but it of course still has changed. As you know, Pat, I do not go to Starbucks. I've not gone to Starbucks in a very, very long time. Pat did reveal earlier this week on the bonus show that he was almost dragged. I think that you actually did go to Starbucks. Yeah. Pat went to Starbucks during his wacky,
You can only win
wild
so much.
European vacation. What did you get at Starbucks? At least tell us that.
Oh, like a cold brew.
Okay.
With like some soy milk.
Yeah, no more comment. But in any case, Starbucks is doing something that some people like and some people really don't like, which is they are going to be on May 29th closing all company-owned stores. Now, not all Starbucks are company-owned, but they are going to be closing all company-owned stores for racial bias education. Of all the locations, 8,000 are company-owned stores. This will impact about 175,000 employees. They will be trained on how to address implicit bias, how to promote inclusion, and help prevent discrimination. Two major views on this. It's fantastic that such a big corporation is willing to lose out on so much revenue by closing for an entire day. Counter argument to that would be, well, the PR benefit might make them back the money in the week that follows. The other side is Starbucks has decided to bow at the altar of SJWism, and they are falling prey to political correctness and doing this, and it's not really a necessary thing to do.
Yeah, well, when it comes to a giant business, I tend to believe that these good actions are as a result of wanting to get good PR rather than anything happening out of the goodness of anyone's heart.
And of course, good
that's
PR.
Skeptical or cynical, but I think that's rational too.
Good PR connecting, of course, with revenue for these businesses.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what ultimately the motives were of the individuals making the decision. But I think that the big picture motive here is that over the long term, this is going to be good for Starbucks' bottom line, whether it's because of the PR benefit or whether it's because it might actually help them avoid incidents of apparent bias, which of course comes as a result of the incident that took place during our vacation.
Right, yes.
Actually, a couple of incidents took place during our vacation. One where the cops were called on a couple of black individuals who showed up, and what was the argument
wanted to
that
use
they were
the bathroom, but didn't order anything. They had a scheduled business meeting later on there.
Yeah.
And then after being told that they couldn't use the bathroom, I think they used it anyway, and the cops were called on them, and they were arrested.
Yes.
Argument is this wouldn't happen to two white men
people,
or two white women. Yeah.
Right. So you could say that this will be good for their bottom line because of the PR benefit. You could say it'll be good for their bottom line because they will avoid negative PR incidents like the one that took place. Either way, we're sort of dealing with the bottom line, right? If Starbucks believed that over the long term, closing 8,000 stores to do implicit bias training would not be good for the bottom line, they simply wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I think it's good damage control. And, maybe this is a action that they have to take. Maybe it's going a little bit too far. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how successful the training's going to be. Are you going to be able to, untether biases people have had for their entire lives in, a few hours during a meeting? No, you're not. I mean, maybe if there's some subtle things that people are doing, you can kind of work that through, but I don't think it'll be all that effective, honestly.
Although implicit racial bias is much more ingrained than one's opinion about unions. But when I worked at Circuit City, when I was in high school, I've told the story of how you're shown various videos when you got hired. And one of them was like an anti-union video. And it's all framed very positively. Like Circuit City wants to have a direct relationship with our employees, blah, 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 unions bad, whatever. It did affect the opinion of towards unions of a lot of the people in the store. Although, again, your view on unions may not be something that's as fully formed as some of the implicit biases that people have along racial lines. So you're probably right that a few hours of training and video on bias is not really going to undo a life of building up a lot of these stereotypes the way that a video about unions being bad might do.
Right. I think our views on race are ingrained on us, like from the beginning of our lives.
From pretty early.
Like we experience those sort of things like throughout. Whereas the average person may not even know what a union is.
Sure.
Or like know why they're good.
Right.
So that's interesting. Did you experience that just like in dealing with your fellow employees at Circuit City? Like
basically.
you'd hear a comment here and there that they were anti-union?
Yeah, even people who were not particularly conservative in their overall politics did think that whenever the idea of like unionization was brought up, and it wasn't even like an active effort to actually unionize, but just sort of like the concept of how at some stores, some other chains, not Circuit City, grocery stores, whatever, there have been moves in the direction of unionization, even sort of typically left-wing people still seem to sort of be against the idea of unionization. And of course, causation correlation, I attributed at least part of it to the videos that we were shown, although it's hard for me to say that definitively. That's it for today's bonus show. New bonus show coming up tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.